only stare, his eyebrows singed, and his dignity once again at zero. Chapter 5. Sydney the Alligator and the Missing Payroll. The final straw came when $62,000 in base payroll went missing. Binghamton had set a trap. He'd marked $900 bills and left them in a wallet on the beach, hoping McHale's men would find it. But instead of McHale, the wallet was found by Sydney. Sydney was a 6-foot alligator with a penchant for peanut butter sandwiches and a very stubborn bite. "He ate the captain!" Parker screamed when Sydney wandered into the camp with Binghamton's wallet in his mouth. "He didn't eat the captain, you boob," McHale said. "He just stole the evidence." Binghamton, however, was convinced McHale had hijacked the payroll. "I intend to prove," Binghamton shouted at the judge, "that my wallet was stolen by these thieves. And don't give me that story about an alligator." "I object," Parker cried, acting as his own defense attorney. "The alligator, Sydney, has an unhappy childhood. He's a victim of circumstance. The trial was a circus." It only reached its climax when McHale and the crew physically dragged Sydney into the courtroom. The alligator was holding the wallet firmly in his jaws. "There's your evidence, sir," McHale shouted. Binghamton tried to grab the wallet. Sydney hissed. Binghamton jumped onto a table. "Open up, Sydney," Parker coaxed, holding out a peanut butter sandwich. Sydney spat out the wallet. As it hit the floor, out rolled the marked bills, along with a note Binghamton had written to himself about trapping McHale. The judge looked at the note, then at Binghamton, then at the alligator. "And I suggests you find a new hobby, perhaps one that doesn't involve wetlands." Epilogue. The Eternal War. As the sun set over the lagoon, the crew of the PT-73 sat on their boat, sipping cold drinks and watching Captain Binghamton scream at a palm tree in the distance. "You know, Skip," Parker said, looking at his new commendation medal, "life on Taratupa isn't so bad." McHale grinned, leaning back against the torpedo tube. "It's a great war, Parker, as long as you know how to handle the sharks and the captains." From across the water, Binghamton's voice drifted on the breeze. "M. Shale, I'll get you for this." "So help me, I'll get you." McHale just laughed and raised his glass to the moon. The Pirates of Taratupa, a novel of maritime mayhem and military mismanagement. Based on the chronicles of PT-73, Chapter 1. The Garter Belt Crisis. The tropical sun over Taratupa did not merely shine, it interrogated. It beat down on the corrugated tin roofs of the naval base with a relentless intensity that made the air shimmer like a cheap cocktail. Inside his office, Captain Wallace B. Binghamton, known to his men, though never to his face, as Old Lead Bottom, was on the verge of a localized nuclear meltdown. "Wow, wow, wow, wow," Binghamton shouted, his voice cracking like a dry reed. He wasn't cheering. He was vibrating with a specific brand of fury that only a supply officer can induce. "Garter belts. Carpenter, you are the supply officer here. If the nurses need garter belts, you snap to it. Shake a leg." "Oh, you know what I mean. Lieutenant Elroy Carpenter," a man whose spine seemed to be made of wet spaghetti whenever the captain looked at him, stammered in response. "Sir, everything is on my shoulders," Binghamton wailed, collapsing into his chair. "The war? My responsibility. The sinks in the Petty Officers Club? My problem. And now, I get word that Iron Pants Rafferty is arriving today on a sneak inspection." The name Rafferty acted like a bucket of ice water. Admiral Iron Pants Rafferty was a man who considered a loose thread on a sailor's jumper to be a hanging offense. Binghamton looked around his office. It was a mess. The base was a mess. His life was a mess. Suddenly, a localized genius struck him. The kind of genius born of pure, unadulterated cowardice. "Carpenter," he whispered, his eyes widening. "What if I were sick? If I were sick, I could appoint an acting base commander. He would have to face the admiral. He would be the one to get clobbered." "Brilliant, sir," Carpenter chirped. "But who?" Binghamton's lips curled into a predatory sneer. "Not Julian, not Nini. McHale. With Quinton McHale, and his band of cutthroats in charge. They will run wild. They'll destroy themselves right in front of the Admiral. It'll be a massacre. A beautiful, glorious massacre. Within minutes, the plan was in motion. Binghamton began a performance that would have put a Shakespearean tragedian to shame. He groaned, he clutched his stomach, and he swallowed pills like they were candy. When Commander McHale arrived, he found the captain draped across his desk like a discarded rug. "McHale," Binghamton wheezed. "I'm in bad shape. The medics don't know what it is. I have to appoint an acting base commander." McHale, a man whose relaxed posture suggested he spent most of his time contemplating the structural integrity of a hammock, looked skeptical. "Well, sir, Lieutenant Carpenter here." "No." Binghamton barked. Then immediately remembered he was dying. "No. He's a boob. I'm appointing you, McHale. And Parker here. He'll be your acting executive officer." Ensign Charles Parker, a man who once managed to trip over his own shadow on a perfectly flat surface, beamed. "Oh boy. Did you hear that, Skipper? You'll never regret this, Captain." "I know," Binghamton muttered under his breath as they left. "I really know." Chapter 2. The Sultan and the Harem. Command did not change Quinton McHale. It merely gave him a larger sandbox to play in. Within 24 hours, the commander's office looked less like a military headquarters and more like a clubhouse for high seas loiterers. The garter belt crisis was solved. McHale simply found them in a crate marked machine gun parts. But a new challenge appeared on the horizon. A sultan was coming. Specifically, Karim, the Sultan of Marami, along with his 3 daughters, the princesses. "A sultan, Skipper?" Parker asked, adjusting his glasses, which were currently sitting crookedly on his nose. "Do we have to bow?" "Which way is Mecca?" "Just keep the crew away from the princesses, Chuck," McHale warned. But keeping the crew of PT-73 away from anything female and royal was like asking a shark to ignore a bleeding tuna. When the Sultan arrived, he was a man of immense dignity and even more immense suspicion. He traveled with a priceless cargo, his daughters. "Wowie, wow, wow," Gruber muttered as the princesses disembarked. The Sultan's eyes flashed. "The next man who dares to debase the dignity of the princesses will answer to me." The visit quickly devolved into a nightmare of naval protocol. To impress the Sultan, Binghamton, who had miraculously recovered once Rafferty left, insisted on a grand dinner. However, the crew had already made arrangements. Gruber, desperate to spend time with the Princess Siri, intense his eye, had convinced the crew to help him borrow the PT-73 for a romantic moonlit cruise. The problem was, the Sultan also wanted to steer the boat. "It is quite relaxing," the Sultan remarked, gripping the wheel of the 73 as McHale sweated beside him. "If my country had a navy, I would include a fleet of these." While McHale was busy preventing the Sultan from ramming a coral reef, back at the base, the princesses were being escorted to dinner by Captain Binghamton. Except they weren't all princesses. One was Ensign Parker, in a veil, and the other was a very confused sailor named Willie. "You are most kind, Captain," the veiled princess, Parker, squeaked in a high-pitched falsetto. "Anything for royalty," Binghamton boomed, oblivious to the fact that his guest had a 5 o'clock shadow visible through the chiffon. The deception fell apart when the Sultan returned and demanded a dance. As Parker and Willie attempted a clumsy, improvised harem dance, Binghamton's suspicion finally boiled over. He lunged forward, ripped the veil off Parker, and stared into the terrified face of his acting executive officer. "PP Princess Parker?" Binghamton stuttered, his face turning a shade of purple, usually reserved for tropical fruit. "McHale, you're under arrest. Everyone is under arrest." Chapter 3. The Laughing Gas Gambit. The fallout from the Sultan affair resulted in a fitness board hearing for Ensign Parker. Binghamton was determined to break Parker down to seaman second class and send him to a frozen outpost in the Aleutians. "He's a menace," Binghamton screamed in the mess hall. "He torpedoed a garbage scow. He thought it was a nip sub camouflaged with potato peels." McHale knew he had to save his ensign. The crew huddled in their shack, the air thick with the smell of illegal moonshine